Hey guys, Tim here, Big Dog Forge. Got a good one coming at you this time around. We're going to do a Viking Seax and we're going to do a Serpent in the Seax. So we're going to see how that turns out. It's going to be a bit of a long one, so it's going to be a two-parter. And this was a request by a couple of different folks. Shane Moldovan and Ernest Sheffield. Don't get mad at me if I get that wrong, because I'm old and I forget stuff. So I think that's what it was. Shane was asking about the Serpent in the steel, and Ernest was asking about doing a sex. So I'm just going to cross those two over and see how that comes out. I think it'll look kind of cool. Been looking at some YouTube videos, and I've only seen two individuals that have done this. They've done it in a very modern fashion, and we're going to take a more traditional approach to this. So we're going to mix those up. Stick with me on this one. It's a little bit long, a lot of steps to it, but should be fun. We'll see how it goes. Thanks guys, stick with me. Okay guys, we're going to start with some bandsaw material. This is 1-inch wide bandsaw from my metal cutting horizontal saw, and it's made from 1095 steel. I know the manufacturer of this one. It comes from a shop that I work in. And we're going to cut up some of these sawmill blades, 1-inch wide, to match, and we're going to layer these together to start the center of our blade. This will eventually become our Serpent. Alright, so we got to clean both sides of all these pieces up. And we have 11 of the metal cutting pieces and 10 of the 15 and 20 sawmill blades. And we're going to stack those together, so we're going to end up with 21 pieces to start with. And they were kind of an odd count, so I doubled a couple of them up in the middle. You'll see that when I stack it. What I'm wanting to come up with here is a 1-inch square bar, 10 inches long. So there you go. Bandsaws on the right, 15 and 20 on the left. Okay, and we're not quite 1 inch wide there. So we've got a couple of extra of the 1095 blades, and we're going to stick those equally in the center. That should bring us out to the, we separated them by a couple of the center 15 and 20s, so they're not just triple stacked in there. Alright, so we're close to 1 inch in either direction, so that's going to get us started. We get this thing welded up. And I ran out of wire in the MIG welder, so I'm using the stick welder here. And it's acting up a little bit, but it finally came around. And we're going to weld a short handle on this guy this time around, and it's going to be about 4 or 5 inches long. And we use a pair of tongs, something I've been playing with lately, and it seems to not wear on that weld joint as badly, and it tends to make the handle last a little bit longer. Alright, we get this guy in the forge, warm him up a little bit, get some flux on him. And I got pretty lucky this time around. The blades didn't try to warp out. I put quite a few welds on it, and those will eventually be hammered into the steel, but they should disappear after all the process we've got going. So I kept this thing at pretty much welding temperature through all of the process here. Welded it up 3 times, but I kept the temperature up as I was drawing it out. I need to draw this thing out into a 3/4 inch square. And it's going to grow by a couple of inches, so we're going to end up with about a 12.5 inch long bar there. You can see a notch. What I'm going to do is cut this and fold it, and I started cutting it in the wrong place. I was 1 inch off, so we're going to remark it here.
And we'll get it in the forge and get that cut to go most of the way through. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to flux it. It's kind of cold here. I'm not going to bend it yet. I'm going to flux it and scrub that flux off. It'll take most of the scale. We'll bend that guy and get some more flux into it. And we'll straighten everything up. And now we've got 42 layers. Alright, you can see a little notch in the top where I started miscutting it, but that's all going to go away. We're going to hammer this thing down into, like I said, a 3/4 inch square bar eventually. Now this portion of this thing, I wanted to get this Serpent welded up good and quick and tight and all that stuff. I'm kind of limited on time to get these videos done, and this is a long one, so I didn't use too much traditional method doing this particular portion of the blade. But once we get this guy hammered out into the shape that we want, we're going to change things up a little bit. We're still going to be using Scrappy the Viking power hammer, and we'll be using, you know, the vise and grinders, stuff like that. But as far as welding this together goes, we're going to take a very traditional approach to it. Alright, we've got a piece of 3/4 inch round stainless steel bar in there that we're using as a kiss block. Keep this thing nice and uniform. Straighten it out a little bit. Alright, we're going to get it into the vise and we're going to twist the holy hoo-hoo out of this thing. We're going to run a nice tight twist. And I actually heated it about 3 times to get it this far. I wanted to make sure those twists were good in there and I didn't get any cracking or breaking. So, alright, we're going to square it off just a little bit, and then we're going to cut off about 4 inches from one end of it. It's getting a little long for the forge, and we've got plans for that extra bit a little bit later. So we've got our 3/4 inch bar, and we're going to square it off to 3/4 inch wide by 1/2 inch thick. And that's going to create the core for what will eventually be our sacks. And it took about 4 heats to get it there. This material is a little bit tough even under heat. Cool it down a little bit, blenish it out. We're going to have some notches on the edges, but those are all going to weld into the blade. Straighten her up. There we go. Now we're going to clean up 2 sides of this, and those are going to be the 3/4 inch sides. And I'll show you why here in just a minute. We started with a hard stone wheel, and we went to a nice soft flappy wheel because we're going to check this pattern and see what it looks like before we move too far forward. A little hot there, but I don't think ferrite chloride's explosive. There we go. That didn't come out too bad. I kind of like it. Got a couple of areas that are a little bit fine and some areas that are a little bolder, but it's quite alright. This thing's going to be hammered on it quite a bit more, and all this is going to change. Alright, so this is wrought iron. We're going to be using all 4 pieces of this to create our blade. And what we need to do is put that piece that we just made, that Damascus, into a serpent shape. And typically what would happen is you would weld flat bars on the side of it, forge weld it, and then notch them with a bandsaw, and then forge that out. We're going to start with wrought iron, and my striker, Scrappy the Viking power hammer, is going to hit my fuller, and we're going to put V-shaped grooves in 2 of these blocks. We'll offset them on the Damascus and forge weld them. And as we forge weld them, the peaks and valleys should even out, and put the serpent shape, which is the core that we just made, into its configuration. So this was random. I didn't measure this out. I did offset it on the ends so that the lengths of the bar, when you line them up, the peaks and valleys are offset, and they go just like that. So you can see how this sort of makes this sort of snake shape as it goes up the bar. So you see our roll of wire there. Now most people would grab their welder and weld this together, but like I said, we're going a little more traditional. And there's been some debate in the archaeological community as to how this was done traditionally. And typically, like I said, someone would forge weld those on as flat bars and then take a bandsaw and make those grooves in the side, and that's the way it's been done in, recently. But they can't really decide, as far as I can tell from what I read, as to how they thought that it was truly done. Well, I believe that this is probably the only way that you could do it. So we're going to test that theory. I've not done this before like this. Now that flux is on a cold bar, and I fluxed it up before I put it in and heated up, because I'm not going to give this thing a chance to oxidize it all on me. So then we'll warm it up, get some more flux. We're going to give it every chance to weld up. And the next 3 heats you see here, these are all welding heats. The wires are holding up. Actually, some of them are starting to sort of melt into the surface a little bit. So we're going to chisel those off and get them out of the way. If you look really closely, you can see that core starting to take a little bit of a curved shape in there. And we're going to have to draw this out, which is going to stretch out our core, and it's going to stretch out the bar, and this thing's going to end up being a couple of feet long. And the forge is only about 20 inches long, so we're going to end up cutting a piece off the end at some point. So we simply start forging it until it forges out to a flat bar. And what we're shooting for here is 1 inch wide and a 1/2 inch thick bar. And that will be the core for our billet. It was actually interesting trying to forge this on the power hammer like that. It wanted to kick back and forth and up and down. So at this point it was getting a little bit long, and I didn't show it here, but I took it over the saw and I cut about 4.5 inches off one end so it would fit in the forge. And I kept turning it around because the back side of the forge is hotter than the front side, and I wanted to forge it evenly. And I'm using my fuller here to widen that blade. I want to, like I said, end up with a piece that's 1 inch wide, 1/2 inch thick, and it forged out way too thin here. And I kind of suspected that to get all of the imperfections out, get all the lumps and bumps out. I knew it was going to go down past my 1/2 inch, so I just kept forging it. But we haven't got enough thickness to continue our construction here. So what we're going to do is we're going to cut this bar in half once it cools down a little bit. And we're going to fold it over and weld it together. But first we're going to clean it up and see what this pattern looks like. To get it nice and straight here. And it was interesting, the carbon steel and the nickel steel in the center, the fire scale got to it more obviously than the wrought iron on the outsides, and had to grind quite a bit away to get it to be a level surface. But it wasn't too bad. Didn't have to take too much off. It didn't get dangerously thin or anything. So there we go. And clean it up, get it into the etch. We'll leave it in there for 5 minutes. Not too long. Rinse this thing off and see what it looks like. There we go. And it looks kind of peaky and pointy and not so smooth, but like I said, there's still a lot of work to do on this, and that's going to change. So you see that little notches there at the peaks. Not to worry about those. They're going to be filled in. That wrought iron's got a pretty nice little pattern around the Serpent, and those peaks should be calmed down a little bit by the time we're done with this. So there's a lot of processing still left to do on this piece. I like that pattern though. Came out pretty good. I was happy with it. Okay, so we got it into the saw. We cut her in half. And not exactly in half. We offset it a little bit because we had right up towards the handle, there's always a little delamination area and a little iffy spot. So we lined up our serpents as best we could. Obviously they're going to be two different serpents, one on either side. And the danger we run into here is if we don't keep that weld down the center through the whole process, when we go to grind this knife, our serpents are going to be peeking through either side. So we have to be careful. So we're going to get this guy wired up. And wiring these things rather than welding them is an interesting deal. It's difficult to get them tight enough without them breaking, but then when they get into the forge, they loosen up a little bit, and you end up pulling them out and twisting them a little more while they're hot without breaking them, just to keep things in alignment. And I've seen people use hose clamps, like stainless steel hose clamps and all sorts of stuff like that, but this is more traditional. Wire has been made for thousands of years, and this is something that the people who made the original Seax would have done. There we go. Let's get this guy into the forge. And we pretty much want to maintain the size that it is now. We want it to grow to a 1/2 inch thick. That's why we're welding it. But we want to maintain that 1 inch wide on it. So we're not going to forge this too much. We're going to get it welded up, get it to the right size, and we'll be finished with the center portion of our blade. And it welded up pretty easily. It didn't show any signs of any delamination or bad welds. Went together pretty easily. So while we were forging this out, it couldn't quite maintain that 1 inch. So I was happy with taking it down to 3/4. So we got a 3/4 inch piece of round stainless in there as a kiss block and brought it down to 3/4. And that's going to work out just as well. Our Serpent's going to be a little less dramatic, but it should take a few more of those peaks out of it. So, and there she is. Nice. Okay. Clean her up again and see how she looks. So at this point, the peaks that were sticking up towards the edge of the metal that were not filled in, not welded quite right. That was because the wrought iron had folded towards those peaks, and it came in much later. And by this process and by this time, those should all be welded together and filled in. And that's pretty much going to be the pattern on the outside of this blade. Those peaks may calm down just a bit, but my snake's got some fat spots and some skinny spots and some angular spots, but this is pretty much a proof of concept. So I'm not looking for the perfect knife. I'm looking to see if I can get to the end of this thing with a serpent shape in it. I do like that pattern. Looks nice. Alright. So this is the other two pieces of wrought iron. We started with 4. We used the first 2 to make the serpent. And these 2 guys we're going to draw out. I'm going to draw them out to 1/2 inch by 3/4 inch. And they're going on the outside of either side of our serpent core that we just made. I'm going to get these guys forged down, and we'll get them cleaned up, and we'll set them aside for now. Now this is the chunk that we cut off earlier from the twist. It was a little too long. We're going to get a little handle welded on this guy. And we're going to draw him out to 1/2 inch by 1/2 inch. And I put the drawing die on the bottom there, so you go a little bit quicker. Like I said, that bandsaw blade material and that sawmill blade material together, it makes some tough stuff. It doesn't like to move when it's too cold. It's good hard steel. Alright. I know we put a lot of power hammering in this thing, but I wanted to give you guys an idea of what it took to prep all this and get it done. Alright, we're getting that guy cleaned up. So this is a piece of Damascus that was cut off the end. So here's our stack. We have our spine at the bottom, 3/4 inch wrought iron, serpent, and then another piece of 3/4. But I didn't like that piece. It pushed our spine too far away from the serpent. So I took it over and forged it down into 1/2 by 1/2. And it brings our Damascus spine closer to the serpent. All right, and the other side is a little shorter, but that's going to be hammered out into a blade. But you say, wait, there's no high carbon steel on the blade side. Now that's in part 2. You'll have to wait. Alright, we're going to get all these guys lined up, get them where they need to go. We got all the sides and welding edges cleaned up. And that's going to weld together just like that. So we get it into the vise and get everything lined up. Nice straight edge. Get some clamps on this thing to hold it together. As I was doing this, I was thinking about the people from the days of old who would do this sort of thing. They didn't have clamps, vices, and you wonder how a 5th or 6th century Viking blacksmith may have accomplished this without the tools to squeeze it together nice and tight. There we go. She's ready for forge welding. We got our little handle on there. Still surviving. There's our Serpent. And if this forge welds up and it sticks together, we'll have a billet to make a blade from. So this is our initial weld. And I was just hoping it wouldn't buckle and fold and fall apart, and I was very surprised. It was extremely stable by the time I got it over to the hammer. I had it at a pretty good heat, and I think those had started sticking together before the hammer even struck it. Let me get those wires off there so I don't drive those into the edge. And pretty much kept it at welding temperature for 4 welds, and then I started working it a little colder just to get it flat and narrow it up. And we brought it down to 2 inches by a 1/2 inch. And there it is. That's our final billet. That's what we're going to make our knife from. So let's get this thing cleaned up a little bit and see what this thing's going to look like with all these different metals and stacks. And so we have a Damascus spine, wrought iron, our Serpent, which is Damascus and wrought iron, and then a wrought iron cutting edge. And there we go. And you can see some grinder marks in it. And I only dropped this in the etch for about 30 seconds, so it's not super dark at this point. Just wanted to see the pattern. And of course the wrought iron next to the Serpent has been compressed so the lines aren't as heavy. And the wrought iron that's just outside that's got a lot more grain in it. I was afraid some of that was delamination, but it's not. It's just the iron sort of showing itself. Okay guys, there you go. End of part 1. We have a little bit of work done. We've got a lot more to do. Hope you enjoyed this one and you'll tune in for the next one.
Hey guys, that was fun. So now that we have a billet, I've been doing a little research on the internet and looking for examples of Viking Seax type knives. And there's, I haven't read it all yet, so I'm still a little fuzzy with it, but there was a knife in Cooper's Gate, apparently, several of them, that I don't know if that's where they were discovered or where they are now. I'm still reading on it. But they've got some drawings of these things, and it's all copywritten, so I can't put any of it on the internet. But the shapes are pretty cool. They're pretty small knives. Apparently these things were more of a utility thing, and then they grew over time, and depending on like the era that they were made in, they're a little bit bigger, a little bit smaller. But I found one with a pretty good shape, but I've got more material than that, so I think I'm going to enlarge it in length, and we'll see how that comes out. But that's where we're going with that. That'll be part 2. I hope you tune in for that one. That'll be great, and we'll see how it goes. Like I said, not the knife maker, but we have a billet to start with. Hopefully don't mess it up. Anyway, so it was a lot of work. Alright guys, thanks for watching. Like, share, subscribe, and take care. We'll see you later. Be safe guys. Bye-bye.